So for those of you who are just joining, I am Dr. Nika White. I'm so excited. This is always a highlight of my week, and I am so glad that each of you have thought it appropriate to commit your time to spend with us this morning. This is all about intentional conversations and really unscripted, raw conversations to intersect conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, leadership, and business. So hopefully this virtual community chat will be fruitful for each of us. It's not just about knowledge transfer, but equally important, it's also about ensuring that we walk away with information that can be fruitful towards propelling us to the next level. So I am going to shut down this other program just so that I won't have those things. I have some notifications coming in. Okay, so we're up to now 51. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. As I mentioned, this is Intentional Conversations, a virtual community chat that I put together really just for the purpose of helping to hold space for those of us who are navigating these uncharted territory right now as we deal with COVID-19. But every Friday through May, and quite honestly, as long as there's an audience and interest in these community chats, I will continue to host them. But right now I have it scheduled for every Friday through May to convene at this time. We'll have a different co-host every week, and so I'm excited momentarily to introduce this week's co-host. But these virtual sessions are an opportunity to hold space for communities to come together to learn with and from each other. So I'll tell you that myself nor my co-host will have all of the answers, but we do hope to bring perspective and expertise that will be of value to those who join these community conversations. Although the topics will certainly vary, what connects all of these sessions together are intentional conversations around matters that, again, intersect diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. And so we'll cover a few different topics. And I'll also share with you that while these specific topics are going to be addressed based upon our co-host, we designed these conversations to be quite fluid, so they're unscripted, especially with the sensitivity and respect for what's top of mind for all of us right now, which again is navigating this time of uncertainty during this global pandemic. So see this as an opportunity to join an informal fireside chat. And even though it's unscripted, I do assure you that some thoughtfulness has gone into preparing so that we can leave each of you with engaging and insightful experience that hopefully will motivate you to act with a sense of hope and purpose and lead to productive days ahead. And it's up to each of us individually to define what is productive. For some of us, productive is just remaining sane and healthy. And for others of us, it is trying to push forward through maybe some goals and endeavors that we have put on the back burner. So whatever that is, let's each define it for ourselves and be comfortable with whatever that is, because we all are processing this differently. So I want to remind you that the chat room is open. It is a place for you to ask your questions, and it's also a place for you to engage in side conversations relevant to what's being shared, and also to post any type of resources. Maybe it's an article, or perhaps it's some other tool that you found has been instrumental for you that this community could benefit from. Audience engagement is very essential for us, and so while we are going to be using the chat feature, we will open the lines up and invite any of you who wish to share to unmute yourself and do so. As I mentioned at the start, if you are comfortable having your video on, we would love to see your smiling face, come as you are. But for those who are not comfortable with your video being on, that is totally fine as well. We welcome you to listen in and to engage at what level that is appropriate for you. I will share that as an additional resource, we are recording these sessions, and as a follow-up, we will send to each of you this afternoon a link to this recorded virtual community chat, as well as the transcript of the Zoom chat. And so all those resources, you don't have to worry about trying to jot them all down. You'll be able to have that provided to you. Okay, so last but not least, I do want to introduce a couple of my teammates that I believe are on right now. So Anna Viola is my executive assistant. She's kind of helping us with a lot of the technical side of this. Thanks for being available, Anna. And I don't know if Elvia Pacheco Flores is on, but she's another teammate with Nika White Consulting. She's a DEI specialist working along with me. And so she'll be monitoring a lot of our chat room features and conversations that are going on there. So I want to jump right in so we can maximize as much of our time as possible. And I want to jump in by introducing my co-host today, none other than Beth Ruffin. And so Beth, wave so everybody can see who you are for those that have the camera on and they're watching. I'm so excited to have you, Beth. I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself, but first I want to make sure that I give you a proper introduction because I am so grateful for every co-host that finds it fit to say, yes, I want to join with you in creating this sense of community and sharing with others. And so I'm grateful to you for that. And the fact that you said yes, it allowed me to feel valued and seen and heard, and that the work that I'm doing is providing some type of value to others. And so thank you so much for saying yes. And so a little bit about Beth. So Beth has spent 20 years in corporate America before realizing her dream of entrepreneurship. We have similar stories in that regard. She has over 2 decades experience in financial services, healthcare, and technology, and a proven track record in strategic planning, diversity and inclusion, project management, mentoring, customer relationships, and career advancement. In 2018, Beth opened her own boutique consulting firm, yay for you, entrepreneurship, where she guides small businesses in the strategic development and implementation of diversity and inclusion programs. She is the host of At the Table, which we're going to talk a good bit about today, a weekly podcast about elevating the voices of the underrepresented. Her first book, Get Up, details her journey through depression and anxiety and the result of sexual abuse. Her upcoming second book, You Belong Here, I cannot wait to hear more about that, Beth, explores the topic of self-inclusion, and we are going to deal with self-inclusion today. Beth sits on the board of South Carolina's Women's Rights and Empowerment Network, WIN, and she's also the mom to one daughter, Isabella, and in her spare time blogs and travels. Can we just kind of give some snaps in the air for our guest today, Beth? So Beth, the first question, obviously, how are you doing? And I always really want to pause and make sure that people understand that this day and time when we ask that question, we need to make sure that we are stopping and receiving the answers because that question is so critical right now in this day and time. So how are you doing?
Absolutely. And first, I just want to say thank you for asking me because I feel heard, seen, and valued by being invited here. And so I'm doing really well. I'm glad that it's Friday. We started spring break today, so we don't have to do schoolwork for the next week, which is really exciting. It's been a little stressful. We're in our first year. My daughter's in her first year of middle school. So it's been just so many changes. Particularly with schoolwork, and now I'm having to try to remember 6th grade math, which is not fun.
Right. So let's give it up for all of the moms that are joining this virtual community chat because it's already a big ordeal to be a mom when things are normal, right? And we aren't dealing with this global pandemic, but when you're in the midst of having to address the reality of that type of situation on top of being a teacher, a mother, maybe even a nurse in many regards, because we don't really want to go to the doctor for some of the things maybe perhaps prior to COVID-19 we were willing to go to the doctor for. So let's just give it up. So if you all are moms out there, just my hat's off to you. I will tell you, I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage in that although I am a mom of 2, my kids are older, so they're self-sufficient. My daughter is a sophomore in college, and so while she's home during this time, I don't have to worry about relearning any type of homework to assist her. And then my son's a senior in high school, so the same thing. What I will tell you, what I've had to worry a lot about is their mental health, right? Keeping them focused, keeping them encouraged, keeping them on task with whatever their goals are so that they don't lose time and traction during this moment. So anyway, what have you found to be some best practices for yourself during this time?
Yeah, definitely. Mental health is something that, I have to be aware of for myself as well. And I'm very open with my journey with depression and anxiety. What I find is that staying productive helps me stay in a better mental health place. So if there are days where I'm in bed all day, I just don't feel well. But getting up and being productive, and even if it's just taking one thing off of my to-do list, it makes me feel better about the day.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's why I said at the start, we have to define what productive is for us, right?
Right.
Because what's productive for me could look vastly different from the next person. And we don't want anyone to feel the pressure of having the weight of the world on their shoulders when that's not necessary. Because right now, the priority is caring for our families and making sure that we are taking care of ourselves. So I've given, of course, a background of you and your experience and all of your accolades. And I want to understand, and for the benefit of those who have joined this call, I want people to understand your journey in terms of from working in corporate America, and again, the space of HR, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then getting to the place to where you realize, I think I want to try entrepreneurship. We have a lot of women that are joined here who are small business owners or they're aspiring entrepreneurs. And so I think that your story will really be valuable. So please share.
Yes, certainly. So it's kind of funny. I stumbled into diversity and inclusion, right? Never ever had a thought that I wanted to be in the HR space, right? I've kind of lived diversity and inclusion just by the fact of being a woman of color, right? Like we kind of live in that space. But
Right.
I received an awesome opportunity with my last employer to somebody sent me a message that said my audio doesn't sound clear. Can you hear me well?
It's a little choppy. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was me or not, but I'm hearing it too. If there's something you can do to adjust, it's worth trying for certain.
Let me turn my fan off.
Yes, I think that could be it. I told y'all this is raw, unscripted. We're going to get it right though, because we want to make sure that everybody can hear.
If y'all see me sweating, just ignore it.
You're fine.
Okay.
I think I still hear it a little bit, but a little bit better, right?
Okay.
Maybe
All
keep
right.
talking and let's see. Okay.
Hold on a second.
Do you have earphones by chance?
Let me change my microphone.
Okay. So I'll tell you that since I've been doing these, and really not just these, virtual community talks, but all of the Zoom communications, it has been not so much of a learning curve as it is just trying to keep up with the changes that Zoom is making in order to make the system even more protected. And so, this is a little bit of trial and error along the way as we situate ourselves. So I see you have all the equipment. I was about to say you're a podcaster, so I'm sure you have all types of equipment.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, that is so much better. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Good.
Fantastic. That is great. Okay, so go ahead. You were talking about your journey, and you mentioned that your previous employer gave you an opportunity, which kind of led to this journey of entrepreneurship.
Definitely had an awesome opportunity to build, a diversity and inclusion programming for this Fortune 500 organization. And as the team grew and we got some official leadership, I said, hey, you know what? I feel like this is a good time for me to step away because I didn't want to leave the work that I was doing without it being unmanned. And so I said, hey, this is a great time. I really want to work with organizations who maybe they don't have a budget for a diversity and inclusion officer, but they could bring me in as a consultant. I could give them some strategies, some training, right, some tools, and leave them on their way with that journey.
That is so awesome. Well, I'm glad you were in this space along with many others of us who really champion this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it is so needed right now. And one of the things that I do worry about, and I was having this conversation with another DEI mastermind group earlier this week, is that with budgets being cut and with people being furloughed and moved to part-time from full-time, we just want to make sure that we're keeping this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the forefront because some may perceive it to be non-essential. And I'm sure you are as well, of the persuasion that we need to turn up the volume and amplify this work right now. What are you seeing in terms of companies' appetite right now for keeping the work of DEI going?
Absolutely. I think this is a great time really to be offering training, right? Remote training to your teams on, hey, let's keep this work going. Let's get on some Zoom calls. Let's do some remote training around, being an inclusive leader, right? Building an inclusive environment because and this is true in many areas. In times like this is where we really start to see disparity.
Yes.
We see disparity of people's situations at home, right? Disparity in healthcare, right? Disparity in, food. And so just because we're not all in a building together, it doesn't mean that we don't still need to be addressing the disparities that exist in the time of a crisis.
Right, and I think we need to be even more sensitized to the need of creating spaces of belonging because we don't have that proximity with people. We are, convening people where we can, and oftentimes for those organizations that are thoughtful, they're not requiring people to be on camera, maybe encouraging it based on their comfort level. But I've heard of some people being a little frustrated because their employer have been requiring that when we meet, you must be on camera.
Right.
And that leads me to think about the inequities in terms of some people, their home environment is not such to where they want to let people into their space in that regard. And maybe they have kids that are crawling over them or, and I just think that leads to a conversation where people need to recognize that not everybody's situation is the same. And so I feel like that the lack of that proximity to sharing physical space with people is exasperating the need for more deeper conversations around inclusivity.
Definitely. And I will say, I think that this also proves that all the things people have been asking for, right? Like, hey, I'd love to be able to work from home. I'd love to have a flex working schedule. Like, it proves that this is possible, that we can be more flexible as it comes to how we help our employees be their best selves and get
Right.
them.
Right. So outside of the education, what are some other things that we can do as believers of this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion to lead inclusively during this unprecedented moment?
I think two things immediately come to mind. The first is lead by example.
Yeah.
Right. So doing things like this, right? Leading by example, saying, hey, we're going to talk about some business issues, but we're also going to give you space to maybe take a breath at the end of the week, right? To maybe, get some resources to be a part of community, right? So we lead by example. Then I think the other thing is never be afraid to call out exclusion. Okay.
Right.
So when you feel like you're not being included, or you see someone else not being included, or something doesn't sit right, don't be afraid to call that out. I always, let's say you have a team meeting and you feel you felt something, wrong happened, right? Take your supervisor or whomever to the side and just have a kind conversation with them and give them your perspective, right? Yes, like Hannah said, see something, say something, right?
Absolutely.
Give them your perspective. Let them know, how things could be done more inclusively.
No, absolutely. I love that. So I want to go back for a second and so first of all, you and I met a few years ago before your entrepreneurship journey, when you were working from an HR, DEI capacity within, this large organization that you referenced before. And then we just continued to build a relationship, follow each other, support each other. And recently, you and I both were scheduled to present at a statewide conference. And I remember I was there and I presented already 2 sessions in the morning of the last day. I'm kind of packing up and I'm thinking I'm gonna go to this last session and get on the road and head home. And that morning, this is a true story, you all, I get a call, the organizer of this conference. And again, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. And she said, the person that was scheduled to do this session this morning is sick and cannot make it. Can you present this session? And I was like, okay, so, I knew it was in the scope of DEI, so I'm thinking, how hard can this be? You have so much content, Nika, you do this day in and day out. And I said, so what's the session? And she said, Allyship for women of color. And she said, Beth Ruffin was the one to do this. And I was like, oh, yes, of course. And because I have been following you and you following me, I saw that we have, similarities of our perspective on allyship in general. And then, of course, our connectivity to wanting women of color to feel seen, heard, and valued and have opportunities to propel themselves to the next level. And I'll share with you that some of the women that are actually on this call today, they are, all of them, I would imagine, are certainly advocates of creating opportunities for women of color. And I love the fact that there are even women and people that are not women of color who are on this call because they see it fit to be an ally of women of color. I'm going to put her on the spot because I love my friend Tracy Newkirk, and she's on right now, and she's a great example of that. I see how she gives and extends herself to people from mentoring them from a small business perspective, and just providing resources. And so I just want to shout out Tracy Newkirk and say thank you for being here. Tracy, I really appreciate you. But I want to shift now, and I want to talk about allyship for women of color. That is something that you have great passion for. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, certainly. So I think what people don't realize, now, of course, women of color realize this, but I think non-women of color don't realize that we are dealing with biases on two levels, right? We are dealing with biases of being a woman,
right,
and then biases of being a person of color. So we call that intersectionality.
Yes.
And so we are having to fight, you know, microaggressions and biases from two different directions. I'll give you a perfect example. Let me go back and say this. So when we fight for women as a whole, especially in organizations, what I see a lot of time is that the women who benefit from that are white women.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. I love all of my sisters, right? But we find that women of color often fall behind, right? So here in the state of South Carolina, we know that the number that we are always told is women make 76% on the dollar for what white men make. What they don't tell you is that's white women. Black women make 53 cents on the dollar.
Absolutely.
To what white men make. And so we are behind, you know, we're at half of what white men make. And so I think it's very important to make a distinction specifically for women of color, because we have unique experiences, unique barriers, and unique challenges. And so when I talk to allies about, hey, how should you be an ally? The first thing I say is believe us.
Yes, I love that.
Believe. When I tell you about an experience that I'm having, when I tell you, hey, you know what, I wonder if this has something to do with race or with, you know, my gender, believe me. I know a lot of people, they want to say, well, maybe it's not that, maybe you're thinking about it, right? But believe the experience that I am telling you that I'm having.
Absolutely.
That's number one.
No, I love that. It's like, you know, you, and I'm speaking to the other person on the other end, do not have the ability to tell me that my lived experience is not my lived experience. Whether or not the intent was there or motivation was there, that's still my lived experience.
Exactly.
And the implications are just as resounding, you know. And so I always tell people that, you know, sometimes people want to have a pass because they don't know what they don't know. And that's true. And I do want to extend grace, right? We don't always know what we don't know, but it does not exonerate us from the consequences, though, of our actions. And so I am with you. And I love also the fact that you brought up that sometimes we need to provide that level of distinction. I know that for, you know, just convenience reasons, sometimes we will group all women of color together, right? But then sometimes I have to tell people it's okay if who we really are talking about in this situation, or Black women, African-American women, let's call that out,
right,
or Latina women, let's call that out. And so I feel like that's an important factor as well, that sometimes when we're just grouping women of color together, we fail to, sometimes it can dilute these specific instances that particular demographic within women of color are experiencing. Do you see that as well?
Yes, you are absolutely right. I see a lot of people say women of color when they mean Black women. For me personally, I have a passion for all women of color. And so I do use that phrase to mean essentially any non-white woman. And I hate, I want to just clarify, because I'm so used to talking about race every day. And I know sometimes people, you know, it rouses them a little bit. I don't have anything against white women, so I don't want, you know, anyone to feel like I'm against them. It's just I particularly feel called to help women of color.
No, absolutely. And I share that passion with you. You know, I am a firm believer that as we talk about constructs of diversity, it's very broad, so many layers, right? It's not just about the optics of age, race, and gender. But like you, as an African-American female, I am often drawn to helping women that look like me to become successful, because I know that they're very vulnerable in many regards. I have my own lived experiences that causes me to want to gravitate to that. You'll notice that a lot of the co-hosts that I have invited so far are women of color. And it's not to say that I won't invite, you know, non-women of color as my co-hosts. In fact, I'm working on lining up a few co-hosts that are not women of color, but I think that where I am pitching my tent right now is because I recognize that now more so than ever, the most vulnerable are becoming even more vulnerable. And so I want to amplify, again, their lived experiences and try to provide a space for that sense of community and support. So how can, for those who are on the line, if they're thinking about, well, I truly want to support women, particularly women of color, because we're talking about allyship for women of color right now, but maybe they don't know exactly how to do that. What are maybe 2 to 3 quick practical things that we can suggest to this community of supporters and champions and allies to help support women of color during this time?
Yeah, certainly. So aside from believing us, right? I think
Yes.
one thing that's really important is, and yeah, like Chanel said, be intentional, right? Who are the women of color in your life? Who are the women of color in your network that you have access to, right? How can you have conversations with them, right? I have a good friend, Kayla Mallet, who started an organization called Black Women 2020. And her goal is to make sure that Black women feel safe, seen, and supported.
Yes.
Right. And so have a conversation with the women of color or the Black women or, the Latino women, the Asian women in your life, Native women, and say, hey, how can I make sure, hey, when you're around me, do you feel seen? Do you feel safe? Do you feel supported? Right. So ask questions. The other thing I would say is to add, I don't know if advocate is the right word, but I've been in many situations where I was around a table and I was either overlooked or talked over, right? I was disrespected in some sort of way. I was excluded in some sort of way. And after leaving the room, then someone came to me and said, oh my goodness, I saw the way you were treated. That was so wrong. Don't save that for outside in the hall. Be my advocate and ally and say that in the room at the table, because it doesn't help. You don't do any good saying that outside the room. So, those who have that privilege, use that privilege in the room and at the table to advocate.
Yeah. No, so as I kind of catch up on some of the items that's in the group chat, I want to pause here for a second and invite anyone that's, involved in this community virtual chat to feel free to unmute yourself if there's a comment or some additional information and insight you'd like to add to this discussion.
Ms. Ruffin, I couldn't agree more with you. It's really difficult as I don't know if I would consider myself a woman of color just distinctly, because when someone tells me woman of color, they usually tell me, oh, that's an African American. And like I'm excluded, but sometimes I do put myself in that position because we go through the same things. And as a woman, as a Hispanic, and like comparing myself with African Americans, we go through the same things. And when I'm in that position, I feel like I want to get up and say, oh, I'm here. But when you're a woman, they see you like being funny. So I couldn't agree more with you.
And I love that. I agree that Hispanic and Latino women and Black women, we do go through a lot of the same situations. We have a lot of the same experiences, right? We do have also some different experiences. But that's why I talk about self-inclusion. And I don't know if we want to go there now, Nika, or if we want to wait and get more questions. But
I think get a few more questions first, because I definitely want to spend some time on self-inclusion, because that's a topic that we don't really deal with enough. And I do feel like it's a missed opportunity on our part. We have to be able to self-advocate for ourselves. Yes. And so I want to spend some time on that. But I want to go back just a quick second, because I have to give this shout out to Natalia, who just offered up some commentary. I want you all to know that Natalia is a student at Legacy Early Charter School. I can't recall your classification, Natalia. Unmute yourself and let me know what your classification is right now.
By classification, what do you mean?
Are you a junior, sophomore?
A junior.
Okay, she's a junior. She's a junior in high school. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because there are a group of remarkable young women that I mentor, actually through my foundation, Carlo and Nika White Foundation at Legacy. And I cannot tell you how much it gives me life to connect with these girls. So the fact that some of them are on today is amazing. So I just want to applaud you, Natalia, for being here and asking your questions. And so can we just get some snaps in the air for those students that are on? I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
And Nika, this is Elvia, and I just want to piggyback on what Natalia said, and also, yeah, congratulations, Natalia, because you beat me to the punch. Because I was also going to say, and you guys have seen all my comments, as a Latina woman, yes, it's very important that when we say women of color or minority women, that we do specify that we're referring to maybe all other women outside of the Caucasian group, right? Because I think society has made us to immediately gravitate towards Black women when we say women of color, and there are more. I really appreciate you, Beth, for saying how important it is, or at least to motivate us to be able to point out when we feel like we don't necessarily connect or belong within a circle. As a Latina woman, and here I'm talking on a personal note, not from the Nika White Consulting team member, right? But I want to give this example. Currently, we have a Walker's Legacy, and sometimes as one, there's probably one other Latina in the group, but sometimes I may be the one Latina with all my great African-American sisters. I still sometimes feel disconnected. So it's very important to also recognize that. And as that Latina, and this is the next topic, right, that we're going to touch, it's also important for me to bring things to the table where I can let others know that I'm also there and that we have so many similarities at the same time.
Absolutely.
Hair items, that was one of the discussions the other day. I have curly hair. So, and I think Nika will remember this one story. I had straightened my hair and we just connected on that. I'm like, Nika, I cannot be outside right now because if moisture or water in my hair,
I can't either.
So that's something that's similar, but sometimes I have been in African-American circles where I know that because they may not know me, I may not be as comfortable as sharing something like this, because there's also that other view of being looked at as trying to fit or trying hard to be part of the group, when it's definitely something that I also experience.
Yeah. Elvia, I love that you are comfortable leaning into your vulnerability and sharing this with our larger community. I think that one of the assets of having you a part of the Nika White team is that you do bring that lens of lived experiences from the Latina perspective, and you're always constantly reminding us in all of our efforts to continue to not just think about women of color as Black women, African American women, but the broader spectrum on which women of color represent. So I just want to thank you for that, Elvia. Any other thoughts and questions right now before we move on to talk about self-inclusion?
Nika?
Yes. Hi, Joy.
Hi. I'm sorry I look a mess, ladies. I'm home. I'm working home.
You look beautiful.
Thank you, darling. I have a quick question. I have worked in corporate America. I did 15 years in corporate America, and then I did a big switch into the education sector. And I found sometimes, and I don't know why, I feel so uncomfortable saying that, you know, I'm not being treated fairly, especially salary-wise. But then I'll see my coworkers that don't look like me that will go to the table and say, I feel like I deserve more, and we'll get it. But I feel intimidated and afraid because I don't know what will happen. Does that make sense? And I'm being very vulnerable. I've never said that out loud. Now I'm saying it out loud to y'all. How do you get past that?
It makes perfect sense. I'm going to let our co-host start with that, and I have some thoughts as well. Beth?
Yeah, definitely. So this is really where that concept of self-inclusion came in, because I was doing this work again for this large Fortune 500 company, and I spent most of my time, let's just be candid, talking with middle-aged white men, right? Because they're the ones in leadership. They're the ones I'm like, hey, let me teach you to be inclusive. Let's get some inclusive programming. But what I noticed was that inclusion is a two-way street, right? Yes, those in leadership have a responsibility to reach out and include people, but we also have a responsibility to reach up and to demand that we be included, okay? And so things like salary, promotions, right? Getting included on projects or meetings, right? You have a responsibility to yourself to reach that hand up and be included. To not wait for them to invite you to the table. But I think Shirley Chisholm said, pull your own chair up to the table, right?
Bring your
Or
own
I'll
chair.
tell you what, I have now started saying, you know what, why don't you build your own table? If you're not getting an invite to theirs, build your own table, right? So I want to empower women to include themselves, right? So what advice would you give to someone else going through this, Joy?
Yeah, I love
And
that, Beth.
oh, I was going to say, like, the advice that you would give to someone else, right?
Ah,
Give that to yourself, because we do that, right? We could tell our girlfriend the perfect solution to any problem, and then when it comes to us, we're like, oh, I don't know.
right,
Sorry
right,
to cut you off,
absolutely.
Nika.
No, you're fine. I love your commentary. And Joy, you and I have known each other for quite some time now. And we've become friends, and you support my work and I support you. And I will tell you that while we've never worked together in the capacity from a workplace perspective, from a volunteerism perspective, you have so much to offer and to add. And so I just want to speak into you and pour into you right now. I think that also a part of the answer to your question is first and foremost believing that you deserve what you're worth, right? Sometimes the question is, well, how do we get what we want? We have to first know what we want and believe that we deserve that. And so there are so many opportunities for us to, on our own, self-advocate, and we can't feel bad about that. We can't feel bad about taking care of self. And so I want to encourage you. And I also think that for those of us who have allies and sponsors and people that see our worth and our value, certainly leverage those individuals to help advocate for us when we're not in the room. But I think that it starts with just believing that you deserve what you're worth, and then going for it and asking for it. And hey, if it doesn't work in your favor with that organization, there's so many other organizations out there that really do value creating spaces of belonging for people. So just keep that in mind.
I love that you said that, because I had a conversation with a woman a few years ago, and she said, hey, I've been at this company for 20 years and I've not been, promoted. And I was giving her, suggestions. I said, have you gotten a mentor? Do you volunteer? Do you do projects? Like, I'm giving her all these things. And she's like, yeah, I've done all that. And I said, well, you have a choice to make. And she said, oh, I can't leave. I'm not leaving. I said, okay, well, you've made your choice, right? So I love that you said that, Nika, that, yeah, at the end of the day, we all have a choice to make. If we've done all we can and we've advocated for ourselves and we're still not valued, we live in a huge country, a huge world. We're seeing now more than ever. There was a book I read during my MBA program called The World is Flat.
Somebody could put that in the chat room for us, please, because I want to capture all these resources. Okay, yeah. Keep going.
It's either the world is flat or the earth is flat. But it talks about how the internet and technology has really put us all kind of on a same playing level, right? Like, 50 years ago, you could only work in your town, right? That's not true anymore. I mean, there are people living in the United States who work for English companies, right? And so the possibilities, we have so many possibilities before us that internet and digitization and technology have opened up a world of possibilities. So I agree, first believe that you're worth it, but then be willing to also open up your perspectives and open up your opportunities beyond what you see in front of you.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. So I'm turning to the chat now to share some of the conversation. Jalitha Moore is on, and she said, yes, don't discredit my experience because you cannot see yourself in it. So the point about, believe us, when we share our lived experiences resonated with Jalitha. It sounds like maybe a couple others as well. So let's see, what else is out here? I'm looking for some of the questions.
I want to also, there was something that someone said, I want to go back. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, Karen mentioned, as a Caribbean woman, it's interesting how there is a sense of inclusion at times with Black American women. And I wanted to talk about that because I think, yeah, even within different groups, even within different racial groups, there are still divisions, right? And so how do we help each other get past those divisions?
Right. I'm glad you are amplifying that thought, because, and here's my theory about it. And I want us to call it what I believe it is, and you can see if you agree or not, so that we can start being mindful to break that down. I feel like, again, because women of color are very vulnerable for all the reasons we've talked about in this conversation. And so I think that sometimes because we're in that vulnerable state, we feel like the pathway to success is so narrow that we may not be as willing to reach back and lift, while we're climbing, and help our other sisters to be successful as well. But success is not a solo sport, and we have to support each other. I really believe that if we protect the full turf, we are protecting all of us. If one of us wins, all of us win. And so I do think there's something to be said for being much more intentional about leveraging, recognizing, creating opportunities for other women of color to succeed.
And I want to just take a moment and just kind of shout you out for that, Nika, because that's exactly what you've done with me, right? Like, and I've never told you this, but I think one of the reasons I knew that I could go out and do it on my own was by watching you. When I first came to your conference and I saw all the work you do, and I'm like, wow, like I want to do that. And we're in the same state, right? We're in the same industry. Right. But when I went out on my own, you and I had a conversation. You gave me advice, right? It wasn't, and you gave me some valuable advice. And it wasn't about, oh, well, I have to protect this space because I want to be the only one doing this work. But it's like, hey, there's enough room for both of us at the table to do this great work of DEI.
Oh, absolutely.
And so you're a perfect example of that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm honored that you share that. And for those of you who don't know, I didn't include this as part of my introduction of my wonderful co-host today, Beth. But so I am considered, part of my brand is the intentional inclusionist, and Beth, part of your brand is the everyday inclusionist. So we've kind of bonded over that as well.
Yeah.
It's been great. So someone's holding up my book, Catherine Hall. Thank you so much, Catherine. I appreciate that shout out. So yeah, my first book that I authored is entitled The Intentional Inclusionist, and it's all about us leading into our influence to help create spaces that are equitable, that have a strong sense of belonging for everyone, and we can do that regardless of where in which we lead, right? Because leadership is not just about position or title, but it's about our influence. And I followed that book up with another one entitled The Next Level Inclusionist, and it's all about transforming yourself and your work for diversity, equity, and inclusion success. And Catherine has that as well, and she's holding it up. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate your support. But these conversations are really important, and I'll tell you, today is giving me life because I miss being out there talking about this, which is one of the reasons I wanted to create this virtual opportunity. I think that we all have a lot to learn from each other. And I just want to, again, open up the lines for anyone who wants to share comments or questions or add to the discussion to do so at this time.
Hey, Nika, this is Karen. How are you?
Hi, Karen. Doing well.
Just want to say, first of all, thank you for this awesome discussion. And I want to go back real quickly to the importance of, as women, not waiting for that tap on the shoulder, because I think sometimes it was said earlier on, but really I want to drive that home, as I do a lot of work in leadership in D&I, and I see women of color, a lot of women, and not only women of color, women in general, we sit and we talk about the issues, but we forget that, oh, heck, you can get up and make it happen as well. It's going to be different, but it could be better. So we can't always adopt this victim mentality, and we have to step out from, we're always fixing things for other people. We have to move away and say, what are we doing for ourselves? So we embrace the role of caregiver and fixer-upper for everything that's broken, busted, and disgusted. But what are we doing about ourselves, our careers, our aspirations, our dreams that we've had, that we're still waiting for someone to come and rescue us? And we have to really begin to step out of that. And I'm speaking to myself as much as I'm sharing this, because I have to remind myself, all right, Karen, stop whining. What are you going to do to fix this? And that there is a way. And watching the Madam C.J. Walker film about a week or so ago reminded me, like, come on now. I mean, this is not rocket science. Get yourself up. And I have to go back to that Caribbean part of me. You know why you came to America. Now, business.
I love it, Karen. Thanks so much for sharing. And for those of you who do not know Karen Hines, she is just such an astute leader. She does a lot of presentations, and some of you may have heard her speak when she closed out as keynotes at the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Summit that I helped facilitate on behalf of the Greenville Chamber last year. So thank you so much for being on, Karen, and sharing your perspective.
Thank you.
I want to turn to the chat room. Jovian Woods, James, who was on, she says, and we must understand that because someone else has mastered something does not mean that they now become our competition. They now become a person of influence. And I love that. I love that. And what it reminded me of is I remember when I was I was developing my exit strategy to move from corporate America into entrepreneurship. I thought to myself, I have such passion around this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but the work is already being done. You know, there's so many other consultants. The work is out there. And I had a mentor who's also in this space to say to me, but Nika, they haven't heard it from you. And so that just reminds me, we each have our own voice and our own approach to this topic. And so, and that really can apply to so many other disciplines and areas. So we do not need to see each other as competition, but as collaborators and persons of influence. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so there is enough room. I'm seeing that into the chat room as well. Jocelyn Slaughter is on. Thank you for being on. Yvonne Miller is saying, yes, you can't wait for them to recognize and elevate you. We have to sometimes put ourselves in the predicament where we are being asked to take on certain roles and responsibilities. So I want to shift back a little bit and talk about self-care. Particularly at this time, we're finding that we're battling a lot of anxiety. We're feeling maybe overwhelmed and thoughts of fear. What has been some best practices that each of you, and this is for you, Beth, I'll start with you, but then again, I want to open it up to others. You can either share in the chat room or we'll give you a chance to unmute, but share some best practices that's helping us to stay grounded and centered during this time.
So I'm typing into the chat. So I'm learning
those resources.
I'm learning, what's the word you said, that to do more things than once, right?
Yeah.
So I think the first thing for self-care that I've been telling people is to show yourself grace. Right?
Yeah.
This is an unprecedented time in our world. I don't believe anyone alive now has ever experienced anything like this. And so, yes, we may get up every morning with the intention to work at 100%, but that may not be possible. You know, we're dealing with grief, right? You know, some of us maybe have lost income, or if you're like me and you're a quality time person, we are struggling right now, not being able to be around people, right? And so, yeah, give yourself grace that if you didn't get something done today, there's still tomorrow, right? Or if you need to take that break, do it.
Right.
And I think I hope that employers are showing grace too, to not expect 100% every day, because like you mentioned earlier, you know, we're now teachers, we're nurses, right? Cooks, clean, and we have to work every day. So that's my biggest piece of advice is show yourself grace.
Show yourself grace. I love it. So let's go to the chat room, as well as if you want to unmute and share some of the things that you're doing. I'm seeing that people are talking about getting out and exercising, spending time outside. That's definitely a good way to help keep us a little centered, although the pollen is making that a little more complicated these days. Some of you are shaking your head like, yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. Avoid the temptation to be absent in your day. Manage each moment appropriately without the urge to be perfect. I love that. I love that, Frida. Yeah. And that goes back to, Beth, what you were sharing. We have to extend ourselves grace. And I think there's something to be said for helping to protect the mental space and the mental health of others that are in our homes by extending grace to them. You know, we're operating where our patience could be very thin, but how can we try to practice a little bit more patience, a little bit more forgiveness? You know, the other day it was interesting. I was in the kitchen doing a video conference call with the client, and my husband walked out of the room where he was on a conference call, and he said, "Nika, you're being too loud." And I don't know if he thought that I was talking to the kids or what, but I'm thinking, no, I'm on a call too. And so I had to just totally make light of it with my client. But, you know, that's the reality of what we're dealing with right now. You know, all sorts of things could happen. And so any other best practices for remaining centered right now? If so, unmute yourself and share with the group.
Hey Nika, this is Javion. How are you?
Hi, I'm well, Javion. How are you?
Good. We actually just had a discussion with some moms, and one of the things that I was telling them is, self-awareness is powerful. And so
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging your emotional state, wherever you are emotionally, at that point in time, at that day, just acknowledging and speaking up on it and taking the time for yourself to just detox, whether that's meditation or going for a walk or just expressing yourself through prayer or just, calling a close friend. But it's okay to not be okay. And so I think that with us just being leaders and just doing so much and being, leading our family and parenting and different things, that we are trying to keep it together for the sake of the family. But it's okay to have a moment and say, I'm not okay right now.
Absolutely. It's okay to not be okay. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else? This has been such good discussion. I can't believe that we're already almost 5 minutes till we have to close out. Has this been helpful? Has this been fruitful use of your time? I want to shout out some more people that are actually in the chat room. So Joy Clinkscales, we have another Joy Clinkscales who is actually my sister. She's joined as well. And she said, any advice for creating an ally in a very international city where there are large numbers of non-women of color? Gosh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, that's
Beth? And I'm sitting here laughing because I'm like, it would come from my sister. Yes.
We're both looking at each other like,
I know. Creating an ally in a very international city where there are large numbers of non-women of color. So I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and elaborate on that so we can, to buy us time to get some thoughts together. And we'll make this the last question and then we'll close out.
Okay, sure. Well, where the question comes from is that in my daily interactions, not necessarily at work, but just in my fitness classes and women that I've gotten to know socially, a lot of them perhaps, come here and they work at different embassies, and just having conversations with them, they've, described challenges that they've experienced here in the United States, not being born here, but, wanting to prosper and get ahead and, in the American life and success in terms of career. And I just realized that some of them, have come from very challenging experiences. And then they come here to the United States and they're trying to navigate how to be successful here. And I was just wondering, some of as women of color here born in the United States, some of our concerns are very similar. And I just wanted, if you guys had any ideas about how to kind of create an allyship with these women.
So I'll start and then Beth, I'll let you close it out. But I think the first thing is we have to see it as our responsibility to grow in our cultural competence, right? We can't begin to know how to assist our international citizens if we don't really understand their circumstances, their plight, their challenges. And so first and foremost, we have to get out of our own way, get out of our bubble, and to extend ourselves to those connection points and learn about their culture and that background. I feel like oftentimes we hide behind the excuse of, well, I didn't know that was part of their culture, that was their experience. When we don't know things, what do? We find ways to be able to be resourceful to get that information. So sometimes I see that as an excuse more than anything. I think that we can really address a lot of issues of marginalization, disenfranchisement, if we were to build our cultural competence. And that's a personal responsibility. We can't necessarily wait for others to educate us on what their plight is. Beth, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to just also say that I believe inclusion starts with one person, right? When we talk about inclusion, where we talk about these large groups, right? We say, hey, we want to be inclusive of women of color, or we want to be inclusive of this group. But I think getting to know people one-on-one and learning what their individual thoughts, desires, right? Thought process is, that's really where inclusion starts. So how do we get to know people one-on-one? And how, like you said, how do we get to know about them? And then how do we become allies once we've gotten to know who they are as people?
I always share there's two great questions as we're building those relationships with people that are different from us, that we want to be allies for. There's two great questions. The first one is, what do you never again want people to say, think, or do towards your group? And then what do you value about your group that you want people to know? And then once we get the answers to those questions, we have a responsibility to use that information to help be an advocate and an ally, and to change the narrative that often is negative about some of those groups, because they're generalizations, they're stereotypes, right? And so what do you never get when people say think or do towards your group, and what do you value about your group that you want people to know? Unfortunately, we are out of time. Gosh, this hour goes by so incredibly fast. So I just want to end with a couple additional resources that I want to put on your radar. Again, as a reminder, this session was recorded, and so this afternoon, each of you will receive a link to the recording session as well as the transcript of the communication that took place during the chat. And so there's some great resources that have been stated there, so I want to make sure that you have access to those. We will be back here next Friday at 11 a.m. I have another fantastic co-host. That date is 4/17, and it's Monica McCoy. Maybe some of you know Monica McCoy, but she is the Pitch Queen and CEO of Pitch University. She's a global speaker, a business strategist, executive coach, and consultant. And I look forward to having her join with us. One of the things that I will also put on your radar is that we have some other resources that are available to each of you. In addition to the Intentional Conversations virtual chats that we do every Friday, I also have very short, 2 to 5 minute videos that I'm producing twice a week, and it's on my YouTube channel, but they're called Inclusion Uncomplicated. It's all about simplifying DEI. I invite you to go out there and subscribe and get those nuggets of wisdom. We also have live book reading that I'm doing on Instagram every Tuesday at 4 p.m. So I invite you to take advantage of that. I want to give our final word to our co-host, Beth. I would like for Beth to share some resources for you to be able to reach out to her, connect with her. She has, again, a phenomenal podcast. And so, Beth, you have the last word. But before I turn it over, I want to thank each of you for making this virtual community experience meaningful. It would not have been nearly as fun to just have a conversation directly with Beth. And so I think that this experience is what it is because all of you show up. And again, that is a gift to me because, it helps me to feel seen, valued, and I think that's really important for each of us to extend that to each other. So thank you all. Beth, you have the last word.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for coming and for your participation in this. I'll definitely be back next week because I think this is invaluable to just have this 1 hour of time, right, where we can just be. I think a lot of times we don't give ourselves that space to just be. So thank you for giving us that space. I'd love to connect with everyone. On social media, you can find me at the Beth Ruffin. And yeah, that's really the best place to find me is on social media. So I'd love to connect with you all there.
Fantastic. So we're going to officially adjourn. I will stick around for a few additional moments. And Beth, if you have a few moments to stick around as well, that way for someone who may have not had their question to be answered, we would love to engage, but I want to respect the time of all. So you have to jump off. Great. We are officially adjourned, but if you want to stick around, we will continue the conversation for those who would like to. So thank you. Have a great weekend. I don't know if Shantavia is going to stay on or not, but she had a pretty good question that I thought maybe if she's still on, we could address. And she says, do you have any advice about showing up at work virtually? My colleagues seem to be overcompensating by requesting Zoom meetings that could be emails, sending more text, emails, updates. I've noticed more women of color are not doing this. Any thoughts about that? That's interesting. Yeah. I think that some people are maybe overly sensitized to the fact that we don't have that level of proximity from a physicality standpoint. So they're like, every single communication needs to be face to face. And so, they're swinging the pendulum too far in one direction. What would be your thoughts on that, Beth?
Yeah, I think give meaningful feedback and meaningful interactions, right, to the best of your ability that you're able to do. So if it doesn't need to be a Zoom meeting, don't do it just to keep up with everyone else, right? But how can you give that meaningful interaction and feedback, whether it's over email or over chat or on a call if you need to have one? But I think the key is still being authentically you, right? Because people can tell when you're not being authentically yourself.
Right. And I think that the assumption right now for some is that people have more time on their hands, and that may be true for some, but that's not necessarily the case. I have heard In fact, one of my client contacts jokingly the other day said that he told his wife he's ready to get back to work so that he can slow down. And what he was saying is that I'm overworking myself right now. And so, you know, we need to realize is that people are having other duties at home because, again, they have their kids, they have maybe their caregiver for or an elderly family member, or they're having to prepare lunch and, you know, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, we have to be careful not to overcompensate. Let's see, were there any other questions that were not answered during our hour that someone would like to present at this time?
Can I just chime in really quick?
Please. Hi, Letitia. How are you?
I'm well, ladies. Thank you again for this. This has been very vital to me. I know as other women as well. I just want to piggyback off that question. Sometimes it's misinterpret what you say in your email. And it's sometimes easier for me just to do the Zoom. I mean, I can say it in layman's terms. Any suggestions on that? Because I can say it, type it exactly the way I'm speaking now, and then it's transposed as I have no idea what Lakeisha's saying.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And whether we're in a pandemic or not, I think it's a good practice for us to be thoughtful before we hit that send button. You know, one thing that I have found helpful for me is if I'm responding in the moment, I may go ahead and draft it out, but I don't send it. And a practice is that I won't put the person that is going to in the to field, because if I do and I accidentally hit send, that way I know I can go back to it, then I'll save it as a draft. And I find that usually when I go back to it, I am tweaking the language a little bit. And so that's one practice. You know, I think that the same rule applies, even though we're in this pandemic right now, where a lot of the communications are happening through Zoom and through emails. I think that we need to just be thoughtful before we actually engage someone to designate time for a one-on-one by asking ourselves, can this be situated with just an email conversation or some other type of, you know, connection versus having to pull people away? Because again, right now it goes back to the fact that not everybody is comfortable being on camera, you know, and I think that that's an assumption that some people are making. So would anyone add to that?
I'll add to it. I think, Keisha, I'm the opposite. I do much better in writing because I can be a little long-winded when I start talking. So I typically I kind of do the same thing that Nika does, and I'll draft it out and then I read it out loud, because then that kind of gives me an indication of how it's going to be received. But what you may want to do with the Zoom meetings and between scheduling a meeting and sending an email is maybe check in, you know, draft that email, give it a moment and come back to it. And then when you send it, maybe in your closing, say, I hope that made sense. I didn't want to take up too much of your time with the call, but if it doesn't, maybe we can schedule some time to chat. So then that way you're respectful of their time. And if they wanted to speak with you, they'll take that opportunity and schedule the time. But you've kind of, you know, did what was comfortable for you and offered that, and still possibly been able to ask the question or get the communication across.
That's great, Tandra. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
We had a good question come up in the chat.
Okay.
From Kathy. How do we combat the superwoman, Black woman as the mule of the world perspective? I've struggled with being treated this way by others and perpetuating this stereotype myself. This is good and heavy, but it's good. So I can start with some things that I've done. Is we could definitely chat for an hour on that one, Tandra. So what I've done is I've stopped being that, right? Especially when I was in the workplace, when I started doing this DEI work, I said, okay, from now on, I am never volunteering to take notes in a meeting, right? Because it's always like, oh, the woman will take notes, right? I stopped doing that. And then men had to start stepping up and doing it, right? Or we got to a place on a team where we said, well, we're going to rotate it, right? So it was good. So I think the first thing is stop being that person. Stop stepping up for everyone. Stop doing those tasks that no one else is willing to do.
I couldn't say it better. Yes, stop. You know, sometimes we are the influencers of how much people treat us, right? And so I agree. And all of those office housework type things, tidying it up after a meeting, taking the notes, getting the coffee, making sure the beverage station is set up for the meeting. Those are things that a lot of women of color will just gravitate to because they see it as an expectation of them. But, again, sometimes we can help influence how people treat us and what their expectations of us are by just governing ourselves accordingly by how we want to be treated. So I agree, and that is a big conversation. I find it interesting that when I talk about the superwoman syndrome, that people are less forgiving of people of color in general, but, yes, definitely women of color, that oftentimes people that are not women of color or just people of color in general in the audience, they're like so surprised, like that phenomenon really exists. And I'm like, yes, there's studies about it, something like you have to be superhuman because if you were to make a mistake, then that mistake is not as forgiven as maybe our white male counterparts, or even our white female counterparts sometimes, and so it adds additional layers of stress and anxiety that causes us to not be able to bring our A game to our work environment. And then, our performance will potentially suffer. And so domino effect. So yeah, that was a great question. Thank you.
And I'll even say, I think that we can stop this from being passed down to the next generation. Because I've noticed with my daughter, she's like, you put so much pressure on me because I'm always like, you can't bring home anything but A's. You're a Black girl. Like, I'm like, you got to be the best. And she's like, oh, it's so much pressure. And so I'm trying to even step back from giving that mindset to her. So how do we stop it for ourselves as well as for the next generation?
I'm with you on that. When my son was younger, he called my daughter bossy. And needless to say, my response led him to never call her bossy ever again. And so we do have to make sure that we are passing things down to our kids so that we're breaking some of those cycles that just kind of naturally continue. Okay, well, you all have been gracious to extend additional 11 minutes of your time, but I always find it appropriate that for those who want to stay on to not just end abruptly, but take some of those additional questions. But I have enjoyed our time together, and I hope that you all feel satisfied as well. And so if there aren't any other questions, remarks, or comments, then we are going to end out our discussion today. Going once, going last? Okay, fantastic. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Really appreciate you.
Appreciate you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.